The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
At that time, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that district came and called out, "Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But Jesus did not say a word in answer to her. Jesus' disciples came and asked him, "Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us." He said in reply, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and did Jesus homage, saying, "Lord, help me." He said in reply, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." Then Jesus said to her in reply, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And the woman's daughter was healed from that hour. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
One of the many cinematic adaptations of the X-Men comic books was a cartoon that aired on the Fox Kids channel in the 90s. And in one of these episodes, the young mutant Jubilee has, much to her horror and to her family's rejection of her, has discovered that she has mutant powers, and she eventually finds refuge in the mansion for Professor Xavier's School of Gifted Youngsters. And she's talking with Storm, and as Storm is showing her how she can control the elements and how good it is actually to have these mutant-like powers, Jubilee asks Storm, "If our powers are so wonderful, then why do people hate us?" And Storm sagely tells Jubilee, "People fear what they do not understand." Now, to isolate and to exclude people that are different, to look at people who are other, is a very old, very animalistic, very instinctive tendency that we have as creatures. It's almost a sort of survival instinct that we tend to gather people that are like ourselves together and either implicitly or explicitly push away people that are different. And here at UD, you incoming students and you students who are here and know UD well, you will be tempted to exclude. You will be tempted to isolate, to ignore people that are other, that people that are different, whatever that other or difference might mean. And it can take a myriad of different forms. It can be among Catholics, right? Everyone knows there's all sorts of opinions, say, about the right sort of music that should be sung at church. Oh, you like praise and worship music? No. The only form of proper music is Gregorian chant, right? Everything after 1900 is bad. Or it can be seeing people from another country as other, people who were born outside of the United States. People who are different can be deemed so because of the color or the tone of their skin. Or it can be seen other as non-Catholic Christians or non-Christians completely. Now, when that thought comes, when you are tempted to ignore or to push people away explicitly, remember this. Keep this in mind. Of all of the differences, of all of the myriad sort of ways that each of us are different and other to one another, none of these differences, not one of them, whatever it might mean, comes even remotely close to the greatest difference of all. We are other to God. Who is God? As you will learn in your theology classes, if you don't already know, God is perfect. He is one. He is beyond time. He is a magnificent communion of love. He is a perfect outpouring of persons. He cannot be duped. He cannot be bargained with. He's not Zeus. You can't placate him. And what are we? What are we human beings? Not even looking on the level of our world or our country or our city or even our university. Who are we? Well, if you're honest, if at least I'm honest with myself, we're a mess. We're not even remotely close to the perfect communion of God. How easily distracted we are. You all are here on Sunday, so I suspect you have a strong modicum of faith. You want to do the right thing. You're seeking to live and to celebrate these mysteries. And yet, how easily distracted we are. We know what's right and we know what's wrong, and yet how easily we can be lured away from doing what we know is good. How fickle we are, how broken we can become. And what does God do with those differences? How does the one who is perfect and beyond time, who creates and sustains all things in being, how does he respond to these differences? As we heard in the first reading from the prophet Isaiah, the foreigners, the people outside of the chosen people of Israel, people outside the covenant, they, with the people of Israel, will all be brought to the holy mountain of God, will offer sacrifices acceptable and pleasing to God, will worship him together. God responds to these differences by transversing the gap. He calls all people to himself. And this is perfectly seen in the person of Jesus Christ. God does not only reach out from a transcendent place. Yes, God remains entirely transcendent, but he also becomes one of us. Jesus becomes flesh. The second person of the Holy Trinity becomes like you and me. He is a man in all things but sin. God does not save us from a distance. The person of Jesus Christ is the union of the divinity of God with our broken and yet beautiful humanity. In this way, Jesus, if you will, is the true and perfect pontifex. If you're familiar with that Latin word, right? The Romans used it to mean bridge builder, and from it we get the English words pontiff or pope. Jesus is the true bridge builder. The greatest otherness, the greatest difference that can possibly exist, God crosses over and invites us to share in communion with him. Now, you new students will learn a lot about the Greeks, probably more than you ever wanted to know. You'll read Homer's works, you'll read Aeschylus, you'll read Oedipus, you'll read all these great Greek works, and you'll read also the works of Plato and Aristotle. And it's their works that I have in mind. Especially Plato saw God as being one, whole, perfect, and because he was perfect, because he is the unmoved mover, according to Aristotle, he has no need of our broken, changing world. He is in many ways removed. In this way, it makes sense when we come across St. Paul's letter to his first letter to the Corinthians, where he talks about the preaching of Christ crucified is a stumbling block. It's a scandal to the Greeks, to the Gentiles. The unmoved mover, the one who is whole and perfect, becomes like us? Becomes broken like you and me? No. This was difficult for the Greeks to accept. But if this is how God treats us in our otherness, how can we not do the same? How can we do the opposite of what God does? How can we be okay with excluding and isolating people? How can we treat people as outsiders and still call ourselves by the name of Christ? Or maybe to put this in a different way, the more like God we are, the more like Christ we are, the more we love as God loves, the more we act as Christ acts, the more truly human we will be. The more truly ourselves we will be. Will we hear the cry of the Canaanite woman in those people that we see as other? Will we hear her call for healing, for truth, when we come across people that are different? Now, quite often, that cry will not be as explicit as we heard in today's gospel. It will not be a, share with me the truth of the Catholic faith, share with me all of these things. No, it will be more implicit. So will we have the eyes to see? Will we be able to recognize, will you be able to recognize in your peers that longing for God? Will you be able to see in them a desire to drink fully of the faith that we are blessed to enjoy? That Canaanite woman in the gospel was not one of the chosen. She was not one of the people who was in right relationship with God. She was outside the covenant. And yet, she loved. She was a mom. She loved her daughter. In her person, truth, goodness, and beauty were active in her life. You, we, all of us, are called to recognize in the people that we see as other these three transcendentals: truth, goodness, beauty. We are called to see and to recognize them, because in so seeing and recognizing them, we are able to see and rejoice in the grace of God in the lives of other people. Now, God is speaking these words, those first words that we heard proclaimed from the book of the prophet Isaiah. He is speaking them not only to Isaiah, but to you and to me. Observe what is right, do what is just. Now, in additional way, this is an additional sort of command because we are UD students. Remember UD's motto. Hopefully, new students, you'll have it memorized by the time you leave here. And it's in Latin, right? Because we love Latin here at UD. Veritatem justitiam diligite. That is itself a sort of conflation of a quote from the book of the prophet Zechariah. What it means is you. It's an exhortation. It's a command. You diligently seek truth and justice. Observe what is right. Do what is just. Don't look around at people around you and say, well, he's lying, she's cheating, they're doing all of these things, as a way for you to excuse yourself from being true and just and kind. Don't look at other people and say, no, God is speaking to each of us. He is speaking to you. Now, a good UD education should teach you how to recognize what is good and what is true and what is beautiful, not just in the expected places, but also in unexpected ones. Now, when this isn't done, when here at UD, students have chosen to be racist, when we choose to look down and to speak in derogatory terms about women or about men, when we speak homophobic slurs, are we welcoming all peoples into the house of God? Are we leading them with joy and rejoicing into the Holy of Holies, to Jesus Christ himself? Having met a number of students that have gone through RCIA these last couple of years, several of them have said that it's taken them a while to want to be Catholic, often because their Catholic peers put up all sorts of barriers for them to want to enter into the fullness of the faith. Or UD students will graduate and become alumni and will leave behind with a bitter taste in their mouth, often leaving behind the faith that they did have because they felt excluded and pushed away. I'd like to make a special invitation, a special exhortation to legacy students, you who students already kind of know the ins and outs of this university, who had older siblings or your parents came here. Reach out. Befriend your roommate who does not know UD so well. Befriend your peers that seem alone. Don't ignore them. Don't turn away from them. Don't pretend that they're not there, and keep on walking. You legacy students have a great blessing. It's a wonderful thing that you're already somewhat familiar with the weirdness of this university. You already kind of know the professors, some of the weird traditions, some of the odd words that we use to describe things here. Share it. Share it. Share that joy with other people that are just coming into this place for the first time. Now, I was the first in my family to come to UD. I'm the oldest of 3 brothers, and my 2 younger brothers came here to UD as well. And as the first, when I was a high school student, I loved the promise. I was finally excited to be in a Catholic school where the students actually were paying attention to the materials and were engaging the professors in conversation. And yet at the same time, That first year that I was a freshman here was incredibly hard. I felt so alone so often. I was new and I was learning how to navigate this strange place. And I had peers in my class. My classmates were legacy students and they knew this odd place. And I don't attribute any sort of malice to them at all. But they probably never even thought to reach out to people that were new and trying to navigate this university. And I'll be the first to admit it's hard. It's a challenge to reach out and to be with people that are different. It's hard to sit with someone that is so other. But when we give in to that tendency to push people away or to let them stay on the sidelines, we not only harm them, but it's a very old, very classic principle of Catholic theology that when we do this, not only do we harm them, we also deprive ourselves of God's grace. The brilliant C.S. Lewis, who some of you are already familiar with perhaps, wrote a book called The Four Loves. And in one of these chapters on the Four Loves, he talks about the love of friendship and how friendship is not exclusive, but the more friends one has, the more one becomes filled with God's grace. And he writes this: romantic lovers are normally face to face and they're absorbed in each other. Friends are, in contrast, side by side, absorbed in some common interest. Above all, eros, or romantic love, while it lasts, is necessarily between two people only. But two, far from being the necessary number for friendship, is not even the best. And the reason for this is important. In each of my friends, there is something that only some other friend can bring out. By myself, I am not large enough to call the whole man into activity. I want other lights than my own to show all of his facets. True friendship, therefore, is the least jealous of loves. Two friends delight to be joined by a third, and three by a fourth, if the newcomer is truly qualified to become an authentic friend. Then they can say, as the blessed souls say in Dante's Commedia, here comes one who will augment our loves. For in this love, to divide is not to take away. Therefore, we possess each friend not less, but more, as the number of those with whom we share him increases. In this, friendship exhibits a glorious nearness by resemblance to heaven itself, where the very multitude of the blessed, which none can number, increases the fruition which each of those souls has of God. For every soul, seeing him in her own way, doubtless communicates that unique vision to all the rest. That, says an old author, is why the seraphim in Isaiah's vision are crying, holy, 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 to each other. The more we thus share the heavenly bread between us, the more we shall all have. Dear intrepid Eudeers, dear crusaders, don't be threatened by our differences, not only among the differences between us here in this church, but by the differences in your peers that are not here today. As we come forward to receive the great gift of the body and the blood of Christ, may we allow charity to bridge all barriers between us.